We're going to call this meeting to order. This is a special board meeting to hear presentations from vendors with regard to our equity and boundaries work. And first, we're going to do the roll call. Kinsey?
Becker?
Here.
McCoy?
Here.
Leighton and Warren?
She's excused.
Welch?
Here.
Lyerly?
Here.
Mills?
He's also excused.
Gerlach?
Here. Okay. We have 5 board members present, 2 are excused. We're going to dive right in with our first presentation from MGT. Who is with us? If you'd like to please go ahead and introduce yourselves. Actually, before we get started, I just want to say that the board will be listening to these presentations tonight. And then we'll be taking the information home with us. We will not be voting on this tonight. Tonight is just the presentations to the board, and voting will happen at our meeting next week. So, okay. So can you please go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Sure. Yes. Thank you so much for having us. My name is Corinda Barrett, and I'm with MGT, Vice President. I have been with MGT for 4 years. And ironically today, Danny and I are actually about 19 minutes from you, even though I come from Tallahassee, Florida, and Danny is in Texas. We happen to be here visiting North Central Technical College today. So we are enjoying your great city and happy to be connecting with you virtually today. With me, I have David Cates, Daniel Dominguez, and Marcy Horner. So we understand that we have 45 minutes to give you a presentation and then time for questions and answers after that. I just wanted to confirm that and make sure that is the plan.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay.
So,
if we can, let me see. Can I go ahead and share my screen?
yes.
Perfect. All right. So I am going to share, and you should be able to see my PowerPoint. Perfect. Yes. Okay. Awesome. So we'll go ahead and jump in. Our agenda is just to talk a little bit about MGT and Davis and the great work that we can offer you. We'll do project team introductions, so you know a little bit more about our leads and what we can offer in terms of the expertise and experience that we have. We'll talk about our project qualifications and some of the work that we've done for other districts that are like you. And we will also then share our project approach timeline and then talk about why we think you should select MGT. So again, thank you very much for the time that you give us today. So first off, just to jump into MGT, we are one firm, but we're very proud to offer a variety of services through a lot of our organizations. Those organizations include Sierra Infotech, Davis Demographics, which you're going to hear a lot about today, Ed Directions, EHNA, Katamba, and Layer 3. We are very focused on social impact. We are a leader in the SLED area, that is state, local, and education. Our North Star is really all about the impact that we have on students and communities. So that's really important to unite that passion of like-minded people and be able to help you drive success in your community, particularly when we're having a lot of these hard conversations. We do understand the impact that they have and how we're talking about people's lives. So really, this is our mission: impact communities for good. We just really are focused on the good that we can do and the good that we can help you do. We serve across the nation. We are nationally recognized, locally focused. And what's really great about our organization is we're not just an educational consultancy. We have technology, finance, diversity, equity, inclusion, performance, and educational solutions all together as one provider. We have 500 staff members from across the US, and we bring a lot of insight in the work that we do. We have partnered with more than 25,000 engagements in the 50 years, almost 50 years, we're getting ready to celebrate 50, that we have been in existence. Our solutions focus on a lot of different areas. We continue to focus on the fact that we are school people helping school people. In that, we focus on academics, operations, technology, equity, finance, and human capital. So that can be very helpful in projects like yours. We have delivered over 350 solutions to school districts nationwide. 50 million students is the number of students that we have impacted here and across the globe. Most recently, we just did a project with the American School of Doha, and so over in Qatar. So very excited to also have that international perspective too. And we've worked in 42 states. Just to talk a little bit about our team members. I serve as your executive on this particular project. So if there's anything I can help with anytime, please let me know. We've got a few of our leads here. Lance Richards, he has been with us for just a little over a year now. He was a former superintendent, so he has some great perspective. He's worked in some of the projects that you'll hear us talk about today, including Jefferson Parish and City of Lynchburg. Lauren Woods is set up to be, he's proposed to be your project director. He was unavailable tonight, but David Cates is standing in for him, and so is Marcy Horner. So you'll hear a little bit from them too later on. The rest of our team is here. So you'll see the areas that they have. Georgia Leonard, she's project manager. Cameron Arsenault, a GIS analyst. Danny Dominguez is a consultant who will do the community engagement and the diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And Diana Goldstein is our guru when it comes to web-based survey administration. So very excited to have a lead team for you to work with. We also can pull in many other team members as needed. For example, we have Rob Tanner on our team. Rob has worked in Jefferson County and one of the largest districts in the nation, and has great experience with transportation. So we can tap into those folks and into the wonderful expertise that they offer. The next thing I want to talk about and share with you is our experience. And I'm moving through these kind of fast because I do want to get to the heart of what matters, is really how we do our work. So as we've mentioned, 25,000 projects that we worked in a lot of different areas with those demographic boundary studies. We've helped districts make those tough decisions. We understand what it takes to have those conversations. We have worked, for example, we have worked with Metro Nashville Public Schools, very large district. We've worked with Danville Public Schools, Virginia, Fairfax County. We understand how folks are not having children, and we are starting to see the decline in the populations, those younger populations. And with that happening, it really takes a lot to, make sure that we understand all of the different areas, that we help prioritize what matters most to the community, and then are able to assist with looking at those different scenarios that are available. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to David Cates, who's going to share the project approach with you, so you have a good understanding of how we will accomplish this project, how we would propose to do so. David.
Yeah, thank you, Corinda. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I want to just give you a little bit of background on myself as well. As she mentioned, Lauren Woods had a conflict tonight. I'm in his place. Our company, Davis Demographics, combined with MGT about 1.5 years ago. Our company has been doing forecasting and boundary work for public school districts for over 30 years. And I've been part of the company since its beginning about 30 years ago. So I'm going to kind of walk you through our approach and some of more the technical aspects of how we do our forecasting and boundary work. And I'll be able to happily answer any questions you might have afterwards about that. So we've got a 2-slide thing here, kind of our approach. Once we get chosen, the first things we like to do is start off with a kickoff meeting with the project manager on the lead, as well as maybe some assistance with district staff, kind of set up the time work for all the work needs to be done. We start the data collection process pretty much right away. And that starts once we get the student data. I'll share that a little bit with you, get good, clean student data to work with. then the clock starts ticking on the rest of the work. So we start doing our research for development and whatnot and other factors that go into the forecast. So we roll that into our demographic study. And then once we get the forecast and the study done, then we go right into the boundary analysis and helping you look at scenarios, whether you're closing schools, opening schools, just trying to right balance your zones to your schools. We can help you with that. Next slide. And again, a little bit more deeper into the boundary process. I'm not exactly sure how involved you want to get, whether it's just district staff bring in key stakeholders from the community in the process, and then eventually taking that all out to the community. There's the community engagement, which we contribute to, as well as other staff in our company to help you with that process. And again, we tie it into a report that we can share with the public and the board and bring that to the very end of the project there. So that's the next slide, please. All right, not necessarily needing to see the details on this, but what we start with, this is the demographics, the forecasting part of the work we do. We acquire your student data. We look at your current student data, as well as the historical last 3 years. We have a form that the district needs to look at and fill out, essentially saying the data looks correct, it's clean. You sign off on these for all the 3 historical years and the current year. And that once you sign off on the data, then we begin our work. So that's just a screen capture of one of the forms we use for that process. Next slide, please. And I think it's got a little bit of animation. Go ahead and click a few times there. There you go. So what we do, everything that we do, Davis, when we do our forecasting, is using GIS. We've kind of been the leaders in this field for over 30 years. And whether you are familiar with GIS, whether you have it yourselves or you've used it before, in a way that's understandable maybe to most of folks out there, as you've used GIS today, you probably didn't even know it. When you go on your phone or your computer or your tablet, you punch in an address, and then it tells you where the best route is or the time to do it. Essentially, that's GIS. You're taking the street networks, you're mapping out an address, and using satellites tells you the best route to get there. We use the system to map where the students are. So these dots you see are the locations of your students, both, well, the current students we would take a snapshot of, and the last 3 years. So you'd have 4 years of historical data to analyze. And behind each of those student records, you'd have an unlimited number of fields that you could include, such as the obvious, their addresses, their ethnicity if you need to, grade, school of attendance, free and reduced programs, test scores, things like that. They all kind of get brought in there, and any dot you click on the screen can pull up information for any number of those students. Next slide. Once we have the students map, we can get into what we call density maps. This is one we did last year, where you get to see your overall district and the real pockets of where the students are. And that could be maybe some areas are more rural, could be some of those white, yellow, or kind of hot areas. Maybe there's a lot of apartments in there, so there's a lot of clustering. And so that's the 10,000 foot level. We could zoom in at any level and look at your density as well. That's the GIS, that's one of the advantages of using a GIS system. Next one, please. And there we go. Another thing that we do for you is we have what we create study areas. And as we hear, they're planning areas, or let's just say neighborhoods, if you will. The numbers on the screen are just identifiers. They're not necessarily telling you the number of students or whatnot, but this is really helpful on a lot of different levels. One, we create your zones, your existing zones for your schools. Those would be the colors you see. And then we break them into smaller areas, typically anywhere from 75 to 100 PK-12 counts of kids in each area. That's why there's sometimes different shapes and sizes. We also track your development this way. And as you can see through it the aerial imagery, we have parcel data, but we also like to do our forecasting at this level. So if you have, let's say we create 500 of these regions, essentially we're going to create 500 forecasts for you. And then our software groups them by zone, by overall district, and these become the building blocks for doing the forecasting part of our software, where we can move these areas around, color code them, and create new boundaries and zones, and it counts up all those students by the appropriate grade ranges in there. Next slide, please. Another document that we provide, and I've heard this is one of the more useful documents, is when you can tie in your known student records that you pull up on your system on a daily or weekly basis with where the students actually live, which is the mapping I showed you. You could create what's called an attendance matrix, where you can see we have a column if you provide us with your school capacities, and then we look at the number of resident students living in each of their zones versus the enrolled numbers. And you can see if it's above or below the design capacities. You see the transfers in, transfers out, students coming in from completely outside your district, and you get to see the inter and intra-district transfers. This is just a summary sheet, but we have a much more detailed one. It just wouldn't look good on a small screen like this, but this really helps you track and look at your open enrollment, easily see schools that are outgrown their boundary, because when you just look at the enrollment, that doesn't always tell you the picture. You could have been diverting students away because it can't hold that many. So when you look down certain columns here, you can really see your problem areas or areas you need to focus on when you look at the matrices. Next slide, please. This is the flow chart of how we do our forecasting. And what goes into it, I mentioned about the student data, your current records and your 3 historical records. That flows right into the middle part where it says mobility factors. What mobility factors are is we look at your established parts of your community, and we look at, I'll just make it simple, in a certain area in 2020, let's say, how many kindergartners are there? And 2021 student data, how many first graders in that same area? If no one's moved out or in, it's a straight 1.00 mobility factor, what we call straight pass-through. If people have moved out, or children, I should say, has moved out, the number is going to be below 1. If more have moved in that year, it would be above 1. So that's really critical for looking at the historical data. That's where they come in. On the left side, you see the birth factors. So we do historical birth counts. Usually we can get them by zip code, correlated as closely as we can to your boundary. Those are for estimating kindergartners, or in some cases, pre-kindergartners as well. And at the far right there, we have student yield factors, also known sometimes as student generation rates. That's how we fold in the students from new housing. So we track the new housing very carefully. I'll show you in a moment. We visit the sites, we put in phasing, and we apply those yield factors on a yearly basis to see how many students at each of your grade levels are going to be entering your system. And those all go into our forecast, all those different aspects. So now I'm going to show you each of those with some examples. So this is, as you can see there, the historical live birth counts. The orange line or row, that's the base year. Let's just say this was last year's snapshot of student data, let's say from October 22. The numbers above just show you the trends. What's been happening in your zip codes, district-wide. In this case, they've kind of been dropping, but you can see some that have, it's kind of picked up again. We could also now see in the future, the next 3 or 4 years, those have already been born. So we can kind of get the trends of what's going to be happening, we think, in our kindergarten classes for the next 3 to 4 years. And then we do averages after that to estimate for future years. Because if we're going to do a more than a 5-year forecast, a 7 or a 10-year, those children aren't even born yet. So we have to look at current trends and roll those numbers out for the long-term forecasts. Next. Again, these are going to be kind of hard to read, but hopefully you can at least see the colors. These are those mobility factors I talked to you about, where we have 4 years of student data. This was from last year. So we used 2019 all the way out to 2022 data, and we pair up the data. We compare 2019 to 2020, 2020 to 2021, and 2021 to 22. So there's 4 years of data with 3 years of change, and we average it. We don't weigh it. So it's a more conservative model. And what this shows us in your established, I showed you study areas or neighborhoods in your district, what are the trends? These do not include areas with new development. That's going to be treated in a moment, how we fold those in. So these are your established, built out parts of each of your zones. We like to break it down by elementary zones because those are large enough sample sizes to get good numbers out of them, but they're not too small and they're not too large. So in this case, I think there's about 20 or 30 regions. And when you read across, it literally is telling you in that first one, I think it's Atkin Elementary School, K to 1. In general, what happens when you go from K to 1? That column is typically what I call green, one of your more green columns. That's because not all of the kindergartners go to public schools. They go to daycare or they go to, they just don't go to kindergarten. It's not a required grade. And they kind of just show up in first grade in most districts. But 1 to 2 numbers, you can see they're more red. In this district's case, they've been losing kids. Some areas in the community are gaining, but for the majority, they are losing. And you can see that 8 to 9 column. That's one of usually the greenest column. And that's because, again, kids are coming out of the woodwork, so to speak, coming from, let's say, parochial or private schools that are typically K-8. And then they show up in the public high schools. So you'll get kind of a boost there. And then the last 3 years kind of shows you, I guess you might call them high school dropout rates. It kind of happens there. So these are really mostly a reflection, I'd call your resales. What's going on in your community as people are selling their homes and new people or families are moving in. This captures that a lot, apartment migration quite a bit as well. So that's what's happening. These are not from new developments. This is what's happening in those other areas. Next. And lastly, where we bring in from the new housing, we could generate, or if it's sometimes provided by our clients, the school districts, what we call student yield factors or student generation rates. So there could be, these happen to be broken down by PK, K6, 7, 8, 9, 12. They can be reorganized based on your grade configurations, but you can see the numbers. It's actually pretty simple math. With the GIS work that we have, we could identify through the parcel data years of construction. This one we looked at a 10-year window, 2012, 22, and we grabbed all these single family units that have been built during that time frame, about 1,200. That's a good, anything 500 or above is, I like to say, is a good sample size. And then you can see the actual students, because we know your students where they live in conjunction to those parcel where the homes are. So we literally can just do a simple equation. So many students coming out of so many units generates this factor. And in this case, a PK12 single family is 0.585. That's a little over, it's about 59 students come out of every 100 single family homes. And then you can see the breakdown by grades. We can do it by condominiums and townhomes, smaller sample size, the apartments, there's a lot of them, 6,000. And then there's special, sometimes other ones we look at, the one at the far right, just too few units, but we just kind of put that in our tables if those are new units they're going to build. Next slide, please. And again, we do tracking all the development by housing types. We can put in our reports, we put together a lot of charts or pie charts or tables that shows you like total projects, how many units we're estimating by type, and also just totals altogether, and how many students those would be generating. Next slide. And this is another example of the detail we get into our reports. We provide maps that shows the developments tied to tables that shows the project names, how many units, how many have already been built, how many are to be built, what type of projects, the yields applied to them, or what's going to come out of those projects in each area. And these are organized again by your elementary zones. We know that you're going to get them all the way through high school and middle school, but again, these are just zones that we apply these customized rates to and apply them for the units of the new units that are going to be built within your district. Next slide, please. As an example of us, kind of go back, just a photo there. We're hitting the road, we go and we visit the sites ourselves. If we can, if they're not open or available, we call them or we visit with your county and cities as well. So we kind of obviously do a lot of work on the internet as well. We look literally under every rock, as you can speak, and that's one of our strengths, is the level of detail we put into new development. Next slide. Well, like I said before, this all gets folded into our forecast. This is what we call a district-wide resident forecast. We show the 3 years of historical data on the left, the current snapshot, so this would be 2023 for your district, and we roll out a 10-year forecast. And for the next individual years, altogether, what's in there by grade, and this is kind of the summation, if you will, of all those study areas that we talked about, we run for the forecast for. Next slide. We also have the ability with our software to break these down by your school zones. So these are resident-based forecasting, especially if you're going to be doing any boundary work. It's critical to know where the kids are, where they aren't going to be, where they're going to be additional students, not so much on the transferring, because that'll change as you open schools, close schools. When you're doing boundary work, you really got to know where the kids are. So these are reports we can pull up very quickly that tells us in each of your zones, historically, what have you had per grade? Is it a declining area? Is it a growing area? Is it heavily weighted towards younger grades versus, we call it the bubble? Maybe it's moving through your middle and your high schools now, and you're graduating out large, let's say 12th grade classes and bringing in much smaller kindergarten. That's an aging community. Or is it the other way around? Now you're bringing in, let's refurbish, bring in new students and regenerating more students. Every part of your district is going through different transformations, if you will. Some are in growth, decline, or stable. We're able to track that. And again, sometimes what we're doing now for a lot of districts is maybe you're not closing or you're opening a school, but the demographics have really shifted. And this one zone that wasn't generating many kids 10 years ago, we're generating a lot more now. So we can right size some of the boundaries to more correlate to what's in their zone or will be in their zone with their capacities. And the charts below so kind of give you a little quick visual of the areas growing or declining or stable. Next. Also, if you notice there on the right, those are those study areas I talked about. So those little boxy, funny looking shapes, with our software tools, we do a forecast, we can quickly show you pockets of growth or decline, in this case, over a 5-year change. Where's the hot spots, where the area is going to be stable. So there's what we do and how we do what we do, using maps, using good data, visualizing everything that we do is really helps the process, especially when you expand this to working in committees or the public. You know, you're not just running numbers through spreadsheets. These are, I kind of call GIS living, breathing spreadsheet. You actually see where we're talking about the growth. And a lot of times it probably backs up a lot of things that you've thought or the public has thought. We're actually providing the information that justifies a lot of actions that you have to do. And unfortunately, if you're declining or closing schools, it's a very tricky process, and having the visual tools really helps it go a lot more smoothly. Next slide. So I'm going to introduce Danny to help go through some of the community engagement and DEI work, and I'll be back to go over a few more things with you.
Thanks, David. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Well, I just want to take a moment and recognize that that is a lot of dense data, and we recognize that it's not always palatable, right? When we think about how we are trying to engage your community. And so what we offer in our community engagement strategy is one that is directly distinctive to your district, your mission, and your vision at heart. We want these conversations to feel like they are very crucial to the effects of a journey, right? We are trying to tell a story through that data, but we can only do that through the narrative and the storytelling that you and your community can give us. And so what we do is we try to provide almost like a path forward or a journey where we say, where do we want to be, the expectations in that project initiation that you would like us to accomplish, and you alongside us supporting our work in kind of a mutual understanding. The data collection allows us to understand what we know, the present form of what the community takes on and the district takes on. The model review obviously allows us to just take a look at the past. What have we been doing? Where have we been? What are the ways in which we have been successful or need to understand the more critical points going forward? And the community feedback engagement really allow us to share all this information in a way that is, again, palatable to the community, but allows them to really have their voice heard. We oftentimes think a lot about how our strategies allow us not to just hear the person who has the loudest voice in the room, but we get to engage people in a multitude of different ways that allows each and every person to have a point of engagement if they would like to do so. And then finally, that final recommendation piece allows us to see the path moving forward. And so all 5 of these components really allow us to put you all at the center of this work. Even though the data might feel the underlying foundation of it, you are the ones that are allowing us to design it through your lens. And so that's what really our community engagement piece is all about. When we look at reaching the Green Bay community, we do it in a multitude of different areas. As I mentioned, we want to make sure that each and every voice is at the table. We often try to say that we try to make space at the table. It's not just creating a bigger table, creating more chairs, but we use those analogies because we really want people to feel as though at every single level in the community, relationships are being built to make this work effective. We don't want it just to feel like it's the board doing it, even though you all obviously are those directive, those guiding pieces. We want people to feel as though individually they are making an impact in their community. And so we do that in three different ways. We do on-site conferences, so more of a group-oriented effect to allow people to kind of bounce off ideas from each other, to learn about their own lived experiences. We use virtual live polling that allows us through Poll Everywhere to really gather thoughts in a very distinctive and live way that allows for anonymous and for confidential analysis, but allows people to kind of, again, share some sense of consistency, of consensus around thoughts and feelings around there. And then finally, we do the virtual focus groups as well, again, to allow for an accessibility piece when people are working or have kids or may not be able to make it to an on-site grouping. This allows for some more of that, that accessibility piece. We know that organizational growth is only effective through people empowerment. We can give you the work, we can provide you with the data, but it is not even remotely effective if there is no participation, engagement, and empowerment in that work. And so what we do, we go to where you all are. Corinda and David mentioned, we have people across the nation, even across the globe, that allow us to do this work in every time zone, in every state, in every area that allows us to be where you all are. Again, Corinda and I were laughing because we literally are only a few minutes away from you all just in this moment, right? But that's a really effective way to feel as though we are always available to you all through focus groups, through one-on-one meetings, interviews, even voicemail inboxes is something that we always try to emphasize, that we are always a phone call, a text, an email, whatever it is away, because we know that that's the only way that we want this work to be done. We are not people who necessarily have a stake in this. We don't necessarily want our voices or our work to speak the power of what this goes forward, because we know that when we send you with this information, we provide our recommendations, those recommendations are going to be very impactful in decisions you all make at the end of this. And you also will see the fruition of those decisions made for years and years in come. And so we want to really feel as though the community are having an empowerment to create change as well alongside us. We do this in multiple different ways. We listened to you all and understood how important diversity, equity, and inclusion is. And we have a variety of best practices that we utilize across the work that we do. I mentioned that we use the inclusive design of community engagement through multiple meetings at different locations and communities. We know that some districts are very widespread. So we offer different times, different locations, whether they're virtual or in person. That allow people to have access again to those meetings, to have the ability to sit in, listen, get all that information that we offer, so they have a firsthand experience in those community meetings. I mentioned that we do a live polling simultaneously and anonymously to capture various perspectives. I know myself, I like to work in groups of people who I'm learning from them, they're learning from me, and those lived experiences allow us to create a more holistic look at a community. And so those live polling allows us to really share in that consensus. We also meet people where they're at in sense of language. So we utilize real-time interpreters if that's something that's needed. We promote and use culturally inclusive languages through our surveys. We did a project that I think we had around 10 languages that we used in different survey tools that again allowed us to capture a variety of different perspective and experiences. So it wasn't just limited to just an English interpretation of our work. And then obviously we look at the reviews and analysis of these scenarios through a DEI perspective. We understand again that not everyone will be affected or transformed in these recommendations in the same way. And so we want to make sure that the consideration of socioeconomic impacts are being understood, things like transportation and resources being expanded on or merged together in consolidation. We want to understand that the impact of programs and how that access and how those extracurriculars are affected by certain ways that we see that data being culminated in those recommends that we utilize. We want to make sure that we are not just, again, providing with data just to say a student is a number, a place is a location. These things all have stories, and it's up to us to engage and empower you all in the community to really share those stories with us so that we are making really informed decisions through this lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
I'll jump back in here. Thank you, Danny. I want to now focus on our tools, what makes us unique, and how useful this is for you in the process. We've developed our own software called SchoolSite Pro, runs on top of the GIS software that allows us to do the forecasting part I talked to you about, but also now I'm going to focus on how it helps with doing the boundary scenarios. We, as in myself, Davis has been doing this for many years. We've become the integral part of your boundary committee process, whether it's internal with just a few or a handful of staff members, then you expand it, like I said, to include maybe principals or other key district stakeholders, then you expand to the public and bring them all in, all at the time being very transparent, because everything we share how we do our forecasting. We actually run our tools live, during those meetings to help be able to create scenarios. If you flip to the next slide, I did some screen captures of some maps that we create. Essentially shows your current zones overlaid on top of the color shaded proposed zones. And we have ways to show the numbers of current students and proposed forecasted students with the new boundaries. With our tools, we have the ability to do this. Like I said, picture is really handy when you could actually have someone in the committee say, David, can you move these areas over to this zone? What would that look like? How close does that affect our capacities? I'm right now on 6 different committees as we speak. I probably at least 10 a year. I do. All the other project managers like Lauren and other people. This is what we do. We're internal and also public facing. And these maps really, we even create web apps too, to show these maps if the client wants us to allow the public to look at these for access. If they can't get to meetings, they can look at it that way. And we have the tools for that. Next slide, please. I think I also saw in your RFP about looking at walk zones. Using the GIS, typically on the far right, as the crow flies, we use that phrase, a big circle. That's the old traditional way. Well, with our tools now, with GIS, we can create what we call a walk or drive zone, literally from the school out in every direction that's a mile. We can do 2 miles, 3 miles, whatever you want. And then you can kind of see how it's combined. You can see the differences. It's a little tighter when you look at the walk drive zones. We can tell you the number of students living in there and whatnot. So again, for transportation purposes, this can be very handy as well. We have these tools available with our software. Next slide, please. These are, again, not expecting you to be able to see these reports on the screen here, but we call them data enriched reports. What they are is we could pick any geography of your district, the entire district, one sector of it, even a neighborhood, and we could generate 30 to 40 different reports on what essentially socioeconomic information you want. There's a report I typically use called a community project or report that gives a whole list of maybe 30 different things. Median household income, how cost of homes in the area, the breakdown of the age of students in that area, you name it. So we have this all available. You can go to the next slide as well. These are just different things. There's what we call a tapestry, where you can look at different types of families or communities living in certain parts of your district. And this is another way to check at the diversity of the zones. You know, we don't use this as the driving force in creating our boundaries, but once we create a scenario or two or three or four, we can then look at them through this lens and show you, are they diverse enough? Are they not? So we could use these reports for that as well. Next slide. Again, another report looking at, you know, the type of jobs people have. I mean, it's just endless. The 10-page reports per each that break it down by where you were the 2010 census to now, to 5 years from now. So there's really good data that we have available to us to really enhance our reporting. And again, if need be, helping the committees. Maybe for the public, it's a little too much information, but for the committees, these are very useful slides and tools. Next, please. We're getting close here to the end of the presentation. I don't remember, this is Corinda or me, but I'm just going to speak to this a bit. This is kind of our way we look at this project, essentially a 9-month window. Once we get the project started, for the forecasting for the demographics portion, the really critical part is once we get that student data and it's okay by the district, that really starts this calendar or clock ticking. It takes months to get good data. It's get pushed out. So I just want to be clear on that. This is best case scenario. A lot of different departments and people are doing different things at the same time. That's why you see some overlaps there. But overall, from beginning to end, we're thinking it's about a 9-month window. And I'll pass it back to Corinda.
Thank you. Just want to jump in and we've given you a lot of information, which hopefully it gives you a great sense of what you're going to get from us. You know, I think that's really important. And one of the things that our clients tell us is that we exceed their expectations on an ongoing basis. We have repeat clients that come back to us over and over and over again. And that's one of the things that we really pride ourselves on. We believe that this data-centric work is super helpful when you're impacting communities and trying to make a difference. And so you can just see some of the important pieces here. We pride ourselves on being school people helping school people. We're educators, and we've, you know, are very excited to be able to help and to move alongside with you and help you through some of these challenging, you know, through the school closures. We've done it in multiple places in Jefferson County, or Jefferson Parish in Louisiana. We've done that. We're doing it right now in Lynchburg, you know, and so we've done it throughout the country. So we understand how important it is to understand all of these different factors that come into play, to be able to prioritize what students and families want, and then be able to visually show them the impact. So we're very excited to offer these services to you. We want to say thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us today. And we would love to hear from you about what questions you have for us.
Thank you very much. This is Laura McCoy. I do have a question, actually. How does kind of the break that happened in for all schools in this country during COVID, how does that affect your data collection? Because a lot of the data you were talking about was like 3 years out. And how do you account for that? If you could speak a little bit about that.
Sure, David.
Yeah, thank you, Corinda. Sorry. Well, first of all, we are 2 or 3 years past. So, really 2020 was the most impacted year. And as the years have gone on, it's kind of been adjusted to some degree. The mobility is really, again, the historical data. It's captured over those 4 years with a 3-year, change with the average. It's really not been affected too much by that. We base it on the most recent year. This case would be October 23. And the mobility, we take a look at it, we see if it makes sense, we roll the numbers out. We've been doing this again for a number of years since the pandemic. It's really jumped right back to kind of where things are. But I will say this, in general, some areas have just never rebounded. They lost a good amount of students and they have just not re-entered the district. So whatever you want to call it, it's the new normal. Well, I will admit that when we were going through it in 2020 and trying to forecast 2021, as a demographer, it was extremely challenging. We had to tinker with the birth rates because it was an artificial decline. We haven't done that for a number of years. We try to let the numbers roll out. And generally, I'll just say this out front, that our forecast, usually our goal is to no more than 1 to 2% off, plus or minus. And we've still hit those marks in the last 2 or 3 years.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any other questions? Go ahead.
I wonder if you use a local committee or task force to work alongside you, and if so, what is their role?
David, you want to go ahead and jump in on that one? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, when again, and I know this is also tied to other people, whether it be Lance or other people that deal with the public outreach. First of all, we reach out to your county to collect the data and your data directly for your student data. But if you're talking about the process of boundary committee, I'm not sure if that's what you were getting at. Were you getting at that? The process of going through the boundary change? Is that what you were talking about?
I wasn't getting at anything in particular. I just have no idea. I just wondered if you use a committee or if you don't.
Well, like I said, if we're going to be part of your boundary committee to look at change your boundaries, then of course, I mean, we have facilitated before or co-facilitated with district staff. They've come to me saying, David, we haven't done this before. Can you help walk us through the process? And again, in a nutshell, I could say that we usually start or recommend starting with a core group, what we sometimes call a technical group within the district, a handful of people that we work on some scenarios, get some of the criteria going. And again, then we expand it to include maybe principals and other key staff. And then lastly, you bring in from work with district officials who are some of the key public stakeholders into this committee. That's usually the best process, because by the time you really get out there and you start sharing scenarios with the community, you can say that some of your key people have contributed to this. They've shared their concerns, the issues. We made adjustments to boundaries based on some of the public input. And there's always a back and forth. Danny had mentioned when we go to the public and really put these out there for them, I don't know if to really vote on, but give us what the things they like or don't like about it. Then we can take polling, take input, bring it back to the committee, make adjustments before you even present something to the board. So there's a lot of collaboration that goes on. Like I said, I've been in committees where there's only 5 people. I've been in some where we had as many as 60 people, which that's a little too much, I'll be honest. And there's kind of a sweet spot in there, maybe of 12 to 25 maybe in there. But we usually work with district staff closely to figure out what is the best plan, because every community is different.
Go ahead, James.
I appreciate that answer. And we do intend to establish a committee, but looking at your timeline, I saw what looked to be about 3.5 to 4 months worth of community engagement. So if we were to follow the recipe that you just laid out, going from core group of district staff to a larger and kind of expanding out, and we were standing up a committee, how much of that 3 to 4 months is actually committee and public engagement, or is all of that in some of the core group in advance of that timeline?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in with that
Yeah,
one.
go ahead.
Because
Go
when
ahead.
we do the committee engagement, we think of it as a funnel. So we'll start with some interviews with some key folks, and then we want to move into some other type of events that will help us really understand what the priorities are. So when we go before like a school district and we do an open session, we want to make sure that we give them the opportunity to think about priorities, because everybody's going to say, don't close my school. We don't want you to close my school. This is, my great aunt went here. My mom and dad went to school here. You can't close this school. And so we start talking about priorities. Do you want to prioritize certified teachers in the classroom? Most parents will say yes. Do you want to have the safest facilities that you can? Yes. So when we start talking about those priorities, if we start there, then the conversation, particularly about the facilities, and at MGT, we do a lot of the facilities work. So we understand that piece of it too, and how important the facilities are when we're moving these districts and looking at these different models and scenarios, so that we need to really make sure that when we come to the parents, to the communities, that we have, here are the priorities and how would you rank these? And then being able to show, okay, if you move these boundaries around, we're able to put students together. And I'm really excited too, when we talk to parents about that K-8, there's a lot of appreciation for that, because they're like, oh, I only have to drop my kids off at one school or 2 schools instead of 3 different schools. And so there can be a lot of benefit to that. We also notice and greatly appreciate the opportunity for that community school, where there can be those resources that go beyond the education and that can really support families. So, when we have those conversations with the community, we've stood in front of, parents before who are furious and don't want their school closed. And so we understand that, and we're able to guide those very delicate conversations with a variety of different groups. So, we understand that. But yeah, thank you for the opportunity to clarify that.
I add one more little thing there too, if you don't mind. You're talking about the timeline that we have in our schedule there for it. Typically what I like to do is start backwards. What is it you not only want to accomplish, but what do you want to present to the board? A scenario or several scenarios for them to vote on. Well, what is that date? What is that board meeting that you're shooting for? Then you can work yourselves backwards. How much time do we have? And setting up committee dates, and like Corinda said, being able to get out in the community. How many do we have to have? Are we going to do 3 or 4 of them? Let's do them all in 1 week, or spread them out a little bit. There's also, I want to add too that I've been doing these just all through the pandemic. Most of my involvement, believe it or not, has been virtual. It's adding the tools, being able to have people have access to meetings, also not just visiting, that's a plus to it, but also a virtual aspect to it, and planning those out. Whether you start with, like you said, small committee first, and then again, when you know what your end result is, it kind of helps set in motion how many meetings you need. I have districts say, I want to get this all done in 2 or 3 months. That's pretty aggressive, to be honest with you, but sometimes that can be done depending on limiting the meetings. There's some say, you know what, we want to be really transparent with our parents, our community. We had maybe a bad experience before. We really want to take our time doing this right. And sometimes it takes a little longer. So you really will have the main control on how that process lasts.
Thank you. Anybody else? I have just one last question. because it's public education and because we're talking about tax dollars, how do you address like the pressures of like politics on, I don't know how familiar you are with Wisconsin, but things that are happening either locally or statewide when it comes to politics and pressures. I guess what I'm really referring to is like the stress on the system with regard to vouchers, school vouchers. Does this ever come up in your work? And just wondering if you've ever had to deal with that with regard to students leaving the district and funding leaving the district.
Yes, Jefferson Parish is probably the best example of that. If you look at that environment, really everybody's going to private schools there and they're taking their money with them, and it definitely is a challenge. And so those are when those conversations are most productive with the community, particularly when we're talking about the priorities. So if we've taken the time to really understand, here are the priorities, then the decisions and those directions and those models and those pathways become, I wouldn't say easier because they're not easy decisions, but they become better supported positions and better supported directions to go in. So yes, we do understand that. David, do you have anything you want to add to vouchers?
Well, for something that's about to change, to be honest, I'm not really sure if this has been ongoing for a while or it's something that's about to change. It's hard with forecasting to really put that wild card out there. I will say though, if something like vouchers has been active in your community for a number of years, that inherently is in our numbers. Those mobility factors I shared with you before, again, just because you see a student leave doesn't mean they're leaving your district. They're leaving your system. So or the other way around, if they're coming in from the vouchers, they could show up. So the way we do our deep analysis on that type of thing is inherently included in that factor, and those get rolled out into our forecast. But to be honest with you, if it's something you don't have at all, and it's going to start in 2 years, we'd have to kind of sit down together and kind of come up with a plan, because I don't want to underestimate or go to any extreme doing a forecast with you. So those kind of instances, we usually work closely with district staff on how to approach it.
Thank you. James.
I have 2 questions. The first one is on your cost proposal. I just want to make sure that I understand your submission. You provide a total cost. You provide a justification of that cost and number of professional hours and travel combined on the back of that. But then there are hourly rates. And I'm kind of looking at a statement that says this amount will be evaluated. So the proposal you've provided is a fixed cost, but it looks like there is a menu of professional services that might need to be invoked if we go along. So the conversation about community engagement in longer versus shorter, what would trigger a change order or some sort of change to this cost? And how do you handle that?
Sure. So it can be challenging at times, but to look at the differences there. So let me talk through a little bit about our fixed pricing. Our fixed pricing is an all-inclusive price for the work plan that we've given you. And we have a very detailed work plan that we'll work through, and we'll walk through that. So that's what helps keep us within scope. When there are opportunities or there are questions about the scope, we would have those discussions with you. If a project is going longer, so David mentioned, it often is challenging for us to get data that's validated. And so if that takes us longer, then we're going to have more meetings to try to get that data. And we would be having a conversation about this is a point at which this is costing us more time and effort, and we would need to have that. Typically, we work through situations with clients, and it's very rare that within a project and the scope, as long as we're working within that scope, that we add a change order. It's only if there are additional services offered. So let's say you came to us and and let's say you say, well, we want to add 5 more focus groups. So we would talk about the prices for what those would take. If you came to us and you said, we're going to have a meeting and we'd like to have someone be at that meeting, it's a virtual meeting, this is how many hours it's going to be, we want 2 of your people here, then that's when we would go to the hourly rate and say, this is the hourly rate and this is what it would cost to have those people here. But it's not something that we're going to surprise you with. We work within that fixed cost with that scope.
Does that include, does that number include travel expenses?
Yes, we are all inclusive.
Thank you.
My second question was more about demography. So one question I have is, knowing nothing about the subject, right? What we do know is in Green Bay, we've had a rapid increase in change of our demographics in the community. So only providing 3 years of historical data may or may not, or I'm actually asking if you can use your expertise to say, is that enough to project demographic changes across say the next 10 years, right? So I understand in the forecasting that you've provided is more, students will come and go, right? In quantity, but as we look at the diversity of the population, one of our key concerns is making sure that as we make changes in the district, that we aim towards more diversity versus not, right? And trying to balance that. So how, using such a short amount of history, does that work in an environment with noted rapid change in demographics?
David?
Yeah, let me just start off by saying this, and I'm not trying to necessarily pat us on the back, but our model has been in place for over 30 years. And I'm not just talking about the clients I've worked for, the hundreds that we worked for all those years. It has worked in almost every facet. You're declining, you're growing, rapid growth, rapid decline. The areas and the times where it became really challenging were the unexpected, the pandemic, a big economic decline, if you will. Mostly, you don't want to go back too far, because again, things were different even 5 years ago, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. You really want to focus on the last 3 or 4 years. It's worked. Now, if there's new development coming in that you didn't have before, that's going to be reflected in our development research. So if all of a sudden there's going to be a spike in that, we'll capture that. It'll be in there. Figuring out a major decline, like I said, predicting there in 3 years is going to be a bad turn in the economy and everything's going to go down again. We don't quite get into that. So we do look at recent trends. We don't go back too far. The model, we're looking about the last prior 3 years, talking with cities, the county, planners, visiting the sites. You really get a sense of what's going on in the community, what's not going on. Has development slowed down? Has it increased recently? And we make those adjustments when we do our forecast. And the other thing I want to be really clear to you too, I used the word early before, and I want to say it again, transparency. We as in the demographers, there's other demographers, I'm not going to name names, but they do what I call giving you something like put it through a black box. Numbers come in, they come out, they share them with you, and you just kind of have to accept them. We don't operate that way. We share them, our draft, with you first. You look at the development. David, this is too aggressive. Not aggressive enough. You're missing a project. There's a window for staff to contribute to it. And if they say, wow, these numbers look really high, can you explain why? Or these are a little low. There is an interactive process. We have our integrity. We don't just completely try to kowtow to our clients' thoughts. I gave one example that a client years ago would not accept our forecast. He said, there's no way our district has not declined in over 40 years, and essentially forced me to change our numbers. And sure enough, a year later, they declined for the first time in 40 years. So I've done this long enough that I've seen it happen, that you probably should, frankly, get these updated, if not every year. every other year if you're declining or growing quite a bit, because demographics shift and you want to be able to capture those trends one way or the other. But to get right back to your original question, yes, I'm fully confident, despite maybe what you're seeing from 5 years ago or now, that we would be able to capture what's really going on in your community now and in the future.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I have.
Oh, go ahead, James. One more.
So I just want to make sure, because I took a little bit of time to look into your response to the RFP. And so I just, to make sure I understand the change order perspective, right? Community engagement, you actually quantify the number of on-site or virtual engagements that are included in the professional services hours in your cost justification. But it's kind of insensitive to committee work. So would we just, lump the professional services hours that you have associated with boundary analysis, whatever, that's all kind of what we would look at as committee work?
No, we build committee work. I mean, we build our projects so that we would expect to meet with you, probably on average, I would say like every other week. So we have time built in to do that. So it's already inclusive of that.
Is it called out in your response and I just have to do a better job reading?
No, we don't have a called out in our response probably as well as we should. That's a good point though.
Thank you.
But that is definitely part, we can definitely add that in there to make it clear.
Anybody else? Any other question? Okay. I just want to thank you for spending time with us and offering us your proposal, and you'll be hearing from us. We'll be having further discussion as a board and voting on this early next week. So
Excellent.
thank you.
Well, thank you for your time. We greatly appreciate it. We hope we have the opportunity to work with you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Take care.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, we're back. We are joined by representatives of Cooperative Strategies. If you guys, hi, everybody. If you all would just introduce yourselves, please.
Sure, I'm Karen Jackson. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent.
And I'm Justin Rich with Cooperative Strategies. Nice to be here.
Hi. Is it, so it's the two of you tonight?
It is, yeah.
Very good. All right. My name is Laura McCoy. I'm the president of the school board, and I don't know if you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourselves. We didn't do this before, but if you feel like it, otherwise we can dive right in. No? Okay, we're ready to dive in. So go ahead and start.
Okay, let me share my screen here and we'll get moving. All right, can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, well, first of all, thank you so much for the interview or the invitation to interview. We have very much enjoyed our previous work with you all, and we were excited by the prospect of continuing that work with you. So this is our overall agenda for this evening. We'll start with just a quick company overview and then introduce ourselves kind of again. Then we'll review the project approach and timelines that we proposed. We'll then go over our experience along with a few case studies before we move on to Q&A. So first up, our company overview and project team. So Cooperative Strategies is a national K-12 planning firm. We provide a full spectrum of planning services, which I'll review on the next slide. We have offices in Columbus, Ohio, Denver, Colorado, and Irvine, California. We've been in business for over 27 years and have served thousands of school districts in over 40 states. This slide details the services that we offer, as I alluded to a minute ago. We offer assessment, planning, and funding services. So along with boundary planning and demographics, we also have extensive experience in master planning and strategic planning for school districts. We do understand the work that you've completed to get to this point, and we are able to work with your plan to draw boundaries to accomplish your goals. So our entire business model is based on building lasting partnerships. We have quite a few clients that work with us on an annual basis and many that have been working with us for more than 20 years. We understand that one size does not fit all, and we will work with you to build a plan that accomplishes your goals and objectives. While we have proposed a very specific scope of work, we look at this more of as a starting point. We're very flexible and we do want to tailor the process to fit your unique needs. We can and very much will make adjustments to the process so that it's a good fit for the Green Bay area public schools. All right, now we'll move on to introductions. First of all, I want to apologize. Ann Hofstas was supposed to be here. She had a family emergency this evening, so she's not able to join us. But I'll just give her a little overview. She will be our demographics advisor for this process and the principal in charge. She has 23 years of planning experience, mostly with enrollment projections, and she has completed thousands of enrollment projections nationwide. My name is Karen Jackson, previously Karen Daniel Hamburg. That's probably what you've seen on the report before. My primary focus is boundary planning and housing analyses. I've done boundary planning work for all over the country, more recently around here in the Midwest, but I've also done boundary planning out west. And many of these processes involve some level of maintaining or improving diversity, as well as equity planning, whether that's equity in school choice, equity in school programming, equity in access, et cetera. I also lead our housing studies company-wide. And Justin, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Justin Rich. I've been working with school districts in a lot of different facets for over 18 years now. More recently, I've been focused on boundary analyses and demographic studies. So that's been the core of my work over the last several years. I'll be helping Karen along with Ann in this process. And we do take a team approach just to make sure we're leveraging resources and experience and perspectives.
Awesome, thanks, Justin. And along with the three of us, we also have a staff with various skill sets available to help support this project. So next up, we'll review our project approach that we have outlined in our proposal. We use an iterative boundary planning process that not only takes into account district goals, but also community feedback. We very much value community or stakeholder feedback, whether it's from the board, the administration, or the community, and use it to craft a recommendation that both the district and the community can be proud of. I do have a slide for each of these, so I'm going to kind of just breeze past this here. All right. The first step in our process is our plan for planning meeting. Essentially, during this time, we'll want to confirm the process and timeline, as well as discuss other processes that we've done. As I mentioned before, we do want to tailor the process to fit your needs. We have experience doing this work in a variety of ways with a lot of success. We're adaptable and we can evolve to fit your needs. During this time, we also want to establish some equity targets and goals. Equity can mean many things to many different people. We have found that out through our experience. We often find that equity in schools means equity of access to high quality programming or high quality schools, but that isn't always the case, and we want to ensure that we're not making assumptions. We really want to know what equity means to you so that we can work toward that goal throughout our process. So during our initial meeting, we'll also discuss boundary planning criteria. This is criteria that we'll use throughout the planning process as guidelines or planning parameters to create boundaries. We recognize that you already have quite a few guidelines to work from. This is excellent. We've looked at these. I think they're great. We'll also review additional guidelines that we typically see in our other processes, just to make sure that we're creating boundaries that will be acceptable to both you and your stakeholders. All right, so next we'll take a deep dive into the current state of the schools. We'll look at utilizations of buildings or just enrollment divided by capacity and where programs are currently located compared to student populations. Excuse me. We'll look at student demographics and analyze how we can maintain diversity in schools. During this time, we'll also look at using a diversity index, which will allow us to draw boundaries with diverse populations of students without using that student level demographic information that we're not allowed to use. Oftentimes, throughout these processes, we get the question, well, why can't everybody just go to their geographically closest school? We hear it over and over and over again. Because of this inevitable question, we'll complete a closest school analysis, which uses GIS to show what the boundaries would look like if every student were to attend their geographically closest school. The vast majority of the time, we find that the closest school boundaries do not quite accomplish utilization or diversity goals for each school. So it's really just it's some powerful information that we can use when relaying information to the community. We'll also review the cohort survival and housing projections that we created a few years back, actually maybe last year, to ensure that we're still tracking and make any necessary updates at this time. We'll provide density maps, such as the map in the top left. In this case, this district in particular, we looked at density of students by race, free and reduced lunch status, special education, and English as a second language in order to help meet the goal of each school reflecting the breakdown of the greater community as a whole. We can also map demographics, compare capacity and utilizations geographically, and review student transfer rates within neighborhoods or existing boundaries. The map on the top right shows the rates of students transferring out of their home school by half-mile blocks. In this district in particular, we found that the areas with the highest transfer out rates were zoned to the most impoverished schools. All of our reference materials that we create to help paint the picture of why we are undergoing this process and the complexities involved with this process will be posted to a project website. We've really found that the more transparent we can be and the more information that we offer up to the community, the more understanding the community will be of the process, and ultimately the more successful a process will be. Okay. We'll use the enrollment projections and housing study to ensure that we're drawing boundaries with longevity in mind. We certainly don't want to be here again in the next couple of years. We want to make sure that we are drawing boundaries that stand the test of time. We'll look at current year housing yields as well as developments by area. That's what this map on the bottom here is showing, and these housing yields over here. If you've reviewed our reports, you've seen these documents. The maps, tables, and charts on this slide just detail the work that we've completed as part of our 2021-22 analysis. We do have extensive experience using these reports and data sets to inform our boundary planning processes. All right. The next part of our process involves a steering committee. We really like these committees to include both school and non-school or community stakeholders. And we like them to be geographically diverse. We don't want a single area dominating the entire committee. When facilitating a committee process, we ask the committee members do agree to leave their personal agendas at the door and consider the district as a whole rather than just their neighborhood or student. That is easier said than done, but I will tell you oftentimes in the committee setting, it becomes very clear when folks have their own personal agendas that they're adhering to. This committee can be used either as an advisory group that provides feedback on boundary options created internally, or we can even take them through a boundary creation exercise and allow them to assist in creating boundary options. We've had a lot of success both ways. I will say that if we take them through the boundary creation exercise, they will be able to see firsthand what happens when you move a specific area, what happens to the numbers, the domino effect that needs to ripple across the district in order to make it work. So it is beneficial to take them through it, but certainly not required. Which is kind of a good segue into our next slide, our boundary work sessions. So during these work sessions, we will develop or revise, and I'll get to that, our boundary options using the boundary planning criteria to guide us. Visual representation of data is very important in this process. We can show data in a variety of ways to ensure that the community really understands why certain decisions are being made. We found that the more information we can show visually, the more success that we have. People really gravitate toward it. The image on the left here, the top left, this shows an example of an options packet. It includes maps, feeder information, utilizations and enrollment metrics, the number of kids moved, and then benefits and challenges of this option. We have found that when we present both benefits and challenges of an option, because no option is going to be perfect, it really does help with the community understanding that there's no such thing as a perfect boundary. The image on the right over here, this shows an example map used during a boundary work session. And on the bottom, we do have our options creation workflow. All right, so once we create those boundary options and kind of whittle them down to probably between 3 and 5, we'll take these boundary options to the community for feedback. We really want to ensure that the community understands the process and why we're making these changes in the first place, and then why certain decisions are being made in regard to boundaries. We do offer both in-person and online feedback opportunities. And once we get all that feedback, we will compile it into a report. And that will be made available on the project website for the community, committee, and of course, the board, administration, pretty much everybody to review if they wish. So as I mentioned earlier, we do utilize an iterative process with a few different opportunities for community feedback. Once we create our initial options and gather feedback about those initial options, we'll make revisions based on that feedback. In some cases, the feedback does warrant an entirely new option to be created. That's not totally uncommon. We then like to take the revised or new options back to the community for additional feedback. We like to show the feedback in a variety of ways. So along with tables that just show information such as level of support and reasoning behind level of support, we can also take that traditional online surveys to the next level and plot them on a map for more meaningful analysis. It is very helpful to see where exactly specific feedback is coming from. If an entire community is saying, I don't like this option, I don't like this option, oftentimes it's because they're being moved in that option. So it's incredibly helpful to view it geographically as well. And it also helps the decision makers better understand the community feedback and report it back in a meaningful way. And then the last part of our process, of course, is a recommendation. So along with reviewing and incorporating community feedback, we'll measure each option against our equity goals and boundary planning criteria. And that's what this figure down here on the bottom illustrates. We really want our recommendation to consider all factors and be something that the community can stand behind. So moving on to our timelines, we do offer 2 different timelines, and we very much recognize the importance of a district having time to plan for things like enrollment or future enrollment in buildings, staffing in buildings, and then transportation once the boundary plan is approved. So because of this, we did provide 2 scopes within our proposal, each with varying timelines. We're pretty flexible and can certainly alter these timelines in process to fit your needs, like I said earlier. So this is option 1. This is our full community engagement timeline. This option includes a steering committee, 2 rounds of community feedback, and 2 rounds of community feedback that are focused solely on boundary options. The first round of boundary options will be those initial set of options that we create. The second one will be the revised options that we create based on the feedback from the first round. This timeline is approximately 28 weeks. That 28 weeks does include the holidays here. So Thanksgiving and then the December, January holiday. Just a quick note about these do differ slightly from the timelines that are available in our proposal. In our proposal, our timeline started in September, so we just pushed it back a month. Our second timeline, so option 2, this is our alternative community engagement timeline. This scope features internal boundary creation, so we wouldn't have a committee in this case. And 2 community engagement opportunities. The first is to allow the community input on creating criteria. And the second would be to gather feedback based on our boundary options. So just a note, by gathering feedback on boundary criteria from the community up front, we will be able to tailor our options to the community values and hopefully bring them options that are a little bit more fleshed out in that case. This timeline is approximately 17 weeks. Again, we are including the November and December, January holidays in here. Those are those grade out weeks. So next up, we'll cover our relevant experience and just go through a couple of case studies. So on this slide, these are just a few of our current and previous school closure or consolidation projects. This is tough work, and we really understand how difficult it is to close schools. It can be just a messy and emotional process, and I don't envy you for having to go through that. We do have experience and expertise to support you and your decisions to close schools throughout the process. We are all about supporting this decision, and we will be equipped with data sets to explain and illustrate the need to do so throughout our work. We do understand that our projections were what informed a lot of that work, so we are ready to explain those to the community. All right, moving on to case studies here. Our first case study is Olentangy Local Schools in Ohio. This is a fast-growing district just north of Columbus, a little bit different of a situation than you're in. Although Olentangy does maintain a facilities committee that makes facilities recommendations to the district. So similar to our previous work with you and your team, we support this committee by providing enrollment projections and housing analyses on a near annual basis, which does inform their facilities recommendations. Then when new facilities are recommended and constructed, we were then brought in to facilitate a boundary change process. We have a 25-year partnership with Olentangy that spans 6, I think it's almost 7 now, administration changes, as well as the construction of over 15 schools. So we have a very long-term relationship with them. The map on this slide just shows the student density change over time. Back in 2005, 2006, you can see a lot of their density was in the south side. It has moved very much north. And this is their student potential, similar to how yours looked. Colors would probably be the same if you're familiar with that report. We are projecting continued growth for them. Next up is going to be Auburn City Schools in Alabama. So Auburn City Schools prioritizes, socioeconomic balance for their attendance boundaries. In order to accomplish this, the district runs a K2-3-5 sister school model for their elementary schools. This model really allows for the attendance boundaries to be larger than a K5 configuration would. We have completed multiple boundary change processes with Auburn, and each time we must maintain boundaries of plus or minus 4% of the district-wide free and reduced lunch average. That is a non-negotiable for them. Along with boundaries, we complete annual enrollment projections for this district, and we've been working with Auburn for more than 10 years. And next up is Howard County. Justin, you're muted.
How about now? Sorry about that. I'm going to discuss our experience with another district where we analyzed their proposed boundary changes and the projected impact regarding some key metrics. So Howard County Public Schools is located just west of Baltimore. It serves approximately 60,000 pre-K through 12 students in 75 schools. So the Board of Education of Howard County has policies similar to you regarding a number of redistricting criteria that includes capacity utilization, travel times to schools, community stability, and also demographic composition of affected schools. That's just to name a few. Most recently, we worked with them when they constructed their 13th high school. And the tables that are shown on this slide really highlight the data-driven approach that we take. Karen's run through that. We take this with each proposed boundary scenario just to measure the effect. So starting in the upper left-hand corner, this table evaluates the capacity utilization The percentages there indicate how full a given facility is projected to be, and you'll note that some are over 100, and that just indicates that in those particular instances, they'll need relocatable or interim housing in order to house those students. Now moving counterclockwise down into the lower left-hand corner, this is analyzing travel times, which was a key measure for them, looking at neighboring high schools to that new high school number 13 and what the effect would be for students, breaking it down into various drive time categories. So 0 to 5 minutes, 6 to 10 minutes, and so on and so forth. Then the three tables on the right-hand side, they compared demographic factors such as the racial and ethnic composition, the percentage of students enrolled in English for speakers of other languages, and the percentage of students qualifying for free or reduced lunch status. Next slide, thank you. And I just want to highlight a few other things related to our experience in Howard County. First, while this process was primarily undertaken to address the new attendance boundary for high school 13, it really affected each and every school level. The reason why is because the district has a board policy related to small feeder patterns, meaning they want to avoid situations where a small group of students feed into the next school level in a small percentage. So for instance, a small group of students going from one elementary school to a middle school, say less than 15% or so, that may make the transition more difficult for those students and will ultimately affect their experience at the next school level. Next, the process included a substantial amount of advanced planning and coordination. This is because the public needed time to be able to evaluate and comment on proposed boundary scenarios. And so that required from us quickly preparing data and analyses to make that available prior to public hearing. So they had some public hearing, noticing requirements and providing information in advance. And then one last thing, we had to account for this district's capital plan, similar to Olentangy School District. This is a fairly fast-growing school district, and so they have quite a few facility expansion projects and planned new construction of future facilities. So what we did is we adjusted the assumed facility capacity to account for that in subsequent years. And then we also avoided boundary adjustments in certain areas where there was likely to be changes in the future. Clearly, we want to avoid reassigning students or neighborhoods multiple times in a short span of time. And that's Howard County.
Thanks, Justin. All right, and our last one is Jefferson County Public Schools in Kentucky. This includes Louisville and the surrounding area. So in our map over here, this area outlined in black, this is going to be what's considered West Louisville, which is really the city of Louisville. So we were hired by Jefferson County to rework their entire student assignment plan. When we arrived at the elementary school level, there was great uncertainty with school assignment. They run a cluster model, which is essentially just a large geographic area that has between 5 and 10 elementary schools that families can choose from. They can choose any of the schools. Each school kind of has a different programming. Some are pretty standard, some have very specific programming. They do this, again, just to maximize the diversity of their buildings. Unfortunately, the geographies of these clusters did not align with any other boundary. There was also quite a bit of inequity with programming among the clusters. Some had MST programs, some had traditional programs, and so on. And there were imbalanced utilizations across the board. At the secondary level, the onus of creating diversity in their more suburban schools was solely on the families in West Louisville. The West Louisville area contained nearly 20 different islands, and the students had to travel anywhere between 10 and 25 miles to get to school, and that was their school assignment. The students that live within West Louisville, like I said, they did not have an option to attend a school close to home. Their suburban school was their school assignment. Along with this, during this time, there were more than 200 feeder patterns. There were 227 total feeder patterns throughout the district, which definitely added to the school assignment uncertainty. If you think the map on the left looks a little crazy, we are definitely in agreement. This shows the elementary boundary, or the elementary clusters rather, the middle school boundaries in the orange, and then in purple is going to be those high school boundaries. So you can see there's not much alignment going on there. The overall goal of our process was to improve student outcomes. We wanted to create consistency where all students get a school choice that's close to their home and have similar programming across clusters and boundaries. There was a desire for continuity with defined and predictable transitions from school to school. We also wanted to maintain choice within the district, with the elementary choice clusters remaining and then increasing that choice for students in West Louisville. In order to accomplish this, we created a dual resides program, or model rather, where students in West Louisville have the choice to either continue to attend a suburban school as they had been, or attend a school close to home. We then align the elementary clusters with the high school zones to provide the predictability, that families desired. One of the big goals throughout our process was to have school populations closely reflect the greater community as a whole. We did this using a diversity index, which was based on their diversity goals, and it took into account race, parental level of educational attainment, as well as household income at the block group level, rather than at the student level. We can certainly work with your team to develop a diversity index that is consistent with your diversity targets and goals if that's something you're interested in. In this map over here, this just represents the dual resides program. So anybody in this green, this is going to be in the suburban zone. They're assigned to the Seneca High School. Anybody that's in the screen outline, they can either go to Seneca High School or they can go to a school that is closer to their home within Louisville. So the maps on this slide show just the before and after pictures of the West Louisville area. The map on the left is before and the map on the right is after. As you can see, we consolidated all of those islands into larger zones so that neighbors could attend schools with one another. This area was also given access to a school close to home. In our initial work, we surveyed families and found that approximately 50% of families wanted their students to attend schools closer to home. That was our assumption throughout the process. I have been able to see this plan come fruition. I still work with Jefferson County Public Schools on their implementation team. And we have actually found that more than 70% of families are choosing their close to home option. So really seeing what these families and students getting what they've been wanting, which is access to a quality school close to home, has really been a rewarding experience for me and my team. And with that, we'd like to thank you again for your time this evening and answer any questions you may have. I don't know if you want me to stop sharing or if you have any questions about specific slides we can go back to.
I would keep it up for now. And I'll just ask anybody if they have any questions. Go ahead.
I didn't hear you talk at all about considering integrity, facility integrity, the physical structures. And we already have a lot of data on the physical integrity of all of our buildings. Would you incorporate that into your plan?
Well, we most certainly can. That would be probably part of our background data, what we look at the beginning to kind of give the community and give you all a current state of the schools.
I think that data would be relevant just in terms of how full we make a school, whether or not there's planned projects that are going to be affecting capacity and the level of interest of attending a particular school. Oftentimes during our facilities master plan processes, these are things that we would discuss and do have quite a bit of impact on how we might make recommendations. So I think we would want to get just a better understanding of that specific information related to your facilities in order to determine how that might factor into the criteria we use. And again, I think that's the importance of that plan for planning process, is just to try to get a better understanding of how we're going to be using this process and the criteria in order to, again, make sure that we're equitably serving students within your community.
Thank you. Anybody else? James?
I have a couple of questions. I want to start first with just looking at your cost proposal. You have option 1 costed out and option 2 costed out. You started this presentation with we'll right size the approach to Green Bay public area schools, and I don't see, as far as a real detailed justification. You kind of just have a summary paragraph. I don't know, when we're looking at this and we're wanting to make a near-term decision, and of course, price will be an effective part of that decision, how I evaluate, a option 3, which is not as short as, option 2, because I think that's really aggressive and limits, community contact. But when we look at the next option, I'm just trying to figure out how we would evaluate your flexibility in approach.
Sure. We could accomplish that during a plan for planning meeting. What we've done with other districts is, if they're interested in a third timeline, it sounds to me like you're interested in a lot of community engagement, but maybe a shorter timeline. We could certainly work with you and create a fee that accomplishes that. If a committee is something that you really want to have, I understand you worked with a committee to come up with your facilities recommendations. If that's something you want to continue, we can definitely maybe scale back on some of the other things, or condense the committee a little bit. We just wanted to make sure, with the holidays within the timeline, we wanted to make sure we gave ample time for those community outreach opportunities. And so we would certainly be willing to work with you to come up with an alternative, a third alternative that has that shorter timeline.
Yeah.
It's hard to say off the
Yeah, let me just make sure that I just leave here with a good understanding. I recognize that this is just, off the cuff, and you may not have a prepared answer for that. In your cost justification, you say option 1 is going to cost me between 600 and 650 hours. And then there's a allocation of time for option 2. In your detailed project plan within your response, you don't allocate hours per phase or per activity. So if you could say yes or no to that, I can go back and say, okay, I know I'm just dealing with a general bucket of hours. And it would take further conversation to kind of come up with an option 3. Is that fair?
I would say so. If you're interested in allocating it by hours, though, like I could send that to you tomorrow sometime. If you would like it that way, we certainly can provide that. That's how it's broken out in our like calculations.
I would appreciate that if that's something that wouldn't take time to deliver to us.
No, I can send it to Jake tomorrow.
All right. The second is, when you're presenting slides, and I don't know exactly which slide it was, but it was basically the one that had the challenges and the opportunities for particular change in boundaries. In working both with the committee and with the community, past and recent experience has informed us that stakeholders have, it's hard as a committee member to consume really dense information, and make some judgments and then provide constructive feedback, right? So I look at this, and you have outlined like 5 committee meetings and a couple of community engagements, but there's an expectation that you'll receive feedback and iterate on feedback from the community. can you just walk me through how you structure those engagements to avoid it turning into protest-oriented, don't close my school, but enable them to consume information? And then when do you expect and how do you expect feedback?
Sure. So we have quite a bit of experience utilizing committees, and you are absolutely right. We don't want to push too much on them at once. We usually break things down. Our first meeting, we review the background data and why we're here, what we're doing, this current state of the schools. If we are going to have the committee do an options creation exercise, we then have them work on that during the next meeting. After that, we'll likely have community outreach on those scenarios, in this timeline in particular. That's how we would do it. And we bring it back to them in a very digestible format. We will create a report. We're not going to give them survey data individual by individual. It's going to be summarized. It'll be, we'll have tables and charts that are very digestible, very high level. Just so folks can see really what the overall community sentiment was about each option. We will certainly be reviewing all of that, and we'll be able to pick out the pieces that give advice on the options and how to make tweaks and things like that. Once we have that information, if the committee is being brought through the options creation exercise, they will use that to modify the boundaries. And then we'll bring it back to the community again, do the same process. So we really do strive ourselves on giving information to the community or committee that is digestible. I totally understand what you're saying. We won't have hours and hours with this committee. We'll probably keep it to 2-hour meetings. And with that, we need to make sure that we are communicating the data as concisely as possible.
Karen, I think that, part of our process involves using the committee to help provide a base level of understanding of the issues that are facing the district and really focusing on the criteria to make sure that we're demonstrating how those criteria are affected by how current attendance boundaries are, how future population changes and shifts may affect how we look at those boundaries over time. And in each scenario that's created, I think an important point, just to hammer this home, is that what Karen talked about is not only is there a map that visually represents what that scenario is, but there is a consistent measurement technique of showing tables that have the relevant information. And again, it's important to note that taking complex information and trying to summarize that in a way that is understandable and gets to the heart of the issue, and repeating that over and over again so that you can compare one scenario to another amongst those key criteria and see. And I think that that's the exercise that we walk through during a committee meeting, is to say, this option works well when we're trying to keep communities together or neighborhoods together. This option works well in terms of feeder alignment. This option does not work as well when we talk about balancing socioeconomic. So I think that repetition and understanding that, and then like Karen pointed out, when we go through those options creation exercises, then they start to see what happens when you move different parts of the district into different boundaries, what that effect might be. So I hope that answers the question, but we found that given that repetition, given that baseline of understanding that we set out in our initial meetings to establish, it helps them to be able to grasp what the key points and what the key information is that they want to pay attention to.
Any other questions?
I do. Back to the cost proposal, just wanted to make sure I understood it. The total cost, is that inclusive of both time and any travel associated, or would travel be in addition to the costs shown?
I'm pretty sure it's inclusive. They are both inclusive of those expenses. So it's time and expense. It's total.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? I did have a question. Somewhere in your proposal, in your presentation, you mentioned a diversity index.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Okay, I
It
actually
sounds
have
like
a hidden-
it sounds like a tool that you
It
use.
is.
Okay.
So I had a hidden slide. I was told I was overdoing it on Jefferson County, so I scaled back. But if we look at this, so Jefferson County utilizes a diversity index. And what it does is it looks at demographics by census block group rather than at the student level, which is something we can't really do. And in Jefferson County, they look at the average household income, the percentage of non-white population, and the average level of adult educational attainment. And they use all of that information to come up with a diversity category, which they apply to every student that lives within that block group. So essentially, if you live within a block group, you are applied the characteristics of that block group. This is then calculated into a diversity index by school. So we use every student is assigned that diversity category. That category then goes with the student into the school, and the school has to maintain a very specific threshold for diversity with that diversity index. So in Jefferson County's case, their categories are 1, 2, and 3. I believe they have to maintain a diversity index of 1.8 to 2.2. And that helps them maintain those diverse school populations. I've also seen this used in other communities, and they take other census data sets into account. I'm trying to think of the other factors I've seen before.
How do you account for that if you have a high level of mobility? Like because it feels like that could change quite rapidly if you have a school district like ours that has a lot of student mobility.
Sure. So we would be looking at it at by student level. Once the kids are on the map, they would get that diversity category applied to them. If they move, that would be updated. So we can use census block group data, which would limit us to 2020 information. We can also use American Community Survey, which looks at estimates. The other data set that we have is every year we purchase a big demographic data set from ESRI, the Environmental Science Research Institute, which is the maker of GIS software, our GIS software in particular. And they publish demographic data that uses all sorts of different inputs and has similar data sets. So we can look at average household income at the current year level. We can look at the population demographics. We can look at that average level of adult educational or other factors if you want to look at using other factors at the by year level. So we also have that. We have 3 different data sets we could look at with that.
Thank you. If it's possible, could you verify with regard to the cost proposal with regard to travel costs? Just verify, it doesn't have to happen tonight, just in the next day or so, that for sure that the travel costs are included in these cost proposals.
Definitely. You give
Okay.
me 1 minute, I could do it right now.
Oh, okay, very good, thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else? James, go ahead.
So I'm looking at your project approach and the data collection, and I'm concerned, it's not clear what data from the district you actually collect and how much of it, like how many years of it's to enable forecasting, or do you actually use our data to perform your forecasting?
So that's an interesting question. We're actually at a little bit of an advantage. We have a lot of your data already, just from working with you previously. A lot of times we would be looking at things like collecting boundary information, collecting student. We would certainly be needing student address level data for the current year, but I do believe we have that for the past 2 years already. So in terms of what you would be providing us, you've already provided us with quite a bit of it. We would need the capacity of your facilities as well. But it would more than likely be limited to your current capacities as well as your current student data set.
Thank you.
I think just depending also on the criteria that we're using, making sure that we have student data, for instance, regarding free and reduced lunch status and other things like that, that we would be measuring and looking at the effect of boundary changes on those percentages. We would look for that as well. So again, part of that initial plan for planning is making sure that we're, when we're looking at criteria, it's not just limited to the current board criteria, or if that's it, then making sure that we have a data request that's responsive to that.
Thank you. Anybody else? I do have one more question. Do you have experience with when we have community engagement with sorry, I'm fumbling around here. Do you have experience with translators and having to translate your materials or your proposals, whatever you have, into other languages?
Most definitely. In-house, we can translate Spanish in-house. Beyond that, we can definitely utilize outside services to get documents translated. We have certainly done that before in quite a few communities that we work in. And just to confirm, yes, the cost is inclusive of those expenses.
Thank you very much. Okay. Anybody else have any other questions? I think that's everything then. I just want to thank you very much for your presentation. We'll be voting on this next week as a board. I don't think we have anything additionally to discuss tonight.
Okay, thank you so much. And I will email Jake tomorrow with those fees broken down by item for you.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay, we're not quite done tonight. We still have to take a couple votes. Kinsey, there she is. Hey, Kinsey. Okay, let's go to B under we're voting, we have some employment of staff votes to take. Kinsey, can you do voice votes?
I was just
Not
gonna
everyone.
ask if that's what you'd like. Yep, I can definitely do that.
Let's do that. Yeah, not everyone's there with their computer, so Andrew, can you do the motion, please? Or is anyone there? Okay, go ahead.
I move that the employment of staff as presented be approved.
I'll second that. Any discussion or questions? Okay, we're ready. Go ahead, Kinsey. Oh, we can't hear you.
Here we go.
Hmm.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, Becker,
Aye.
McCoy,
Aye.
Welch,
Aye.
Lyerly,
Aye.
Gerlach.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. I think that's all the business we have tonight. So with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Before we
Oh,
do that, please.
yeah.
Would it be possible, I don't know if it's appropriate, but can I ask a few questions of you folks that listen to these presentations for clarity before we go?
That will happen. We will have discussion on Monday before the vote. We're not, that's not really part of our agenda tonight. So I'm sorry. I think that was sort of the plan for tonight. Okay. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, we are adjourned.
No, we have to vote.
Oh, All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.
You have been watching the Green Bay Area Public School District's Board of Education meeting. Please visit the school district's website, www.gbaps.org, for more information on the district and future meeting dates. If you cannot fully access the information on this video, please let us know the accessibility issue you are having by calling 920-448-2025 or by email at communications@gbaps.org. We will try to provide the information to you in an alternative format and/or make the necessary improvements to make the information accessible.